Hi, this is video 6 of the Snowman series, and in this video we're going to begin lighting and rendering our scene. The project for week 5, the requirement is to submit 3 renders. I'm going to talk about how to create a render, and let's get started. First of all, a render is when Maya calculates the picture of your scene. It takes it from 3D, it brings it to 2D. It'll calculate lighting and shadows and reflections, and depending on the extent of your rendering is something that is very complex, but in this tutorial I'm just going to introduce the basics. We're going to use the Maya software renderer, which is the default. So to show a render, you click there should be a group of clappers here. You open up the render view, and this is the render view. Notice it calculates textures, the lights in the scene. It'll tell you how long it took to render. You can determine what size this window is in your render settings. So render settings is the fourth clapper here, and this is where you would choose your renderer. We won't get into these now, but Maya software will handle basic ray trace rendering. Some of these handle more advanced things. Maya Vector is like wireframes in solid colors. Maya hardware is often used for particles, but it's just different engines that calculate the 2D image from the 3D scene. Alright, so a lot of this, if we're doing a batch render, if we had an animation, we're rendering out 500 frames, this is where we would set the output. But we're not going to get into batch rendering now, or the frame range and all of that. We will set the camera, which is the perspective camera, and we will set the image size. For our purposes, I think let's do, I don't know if 640 by 480 is too small. It's probably fine for this week. It'll be a fast render time. That'll be fine. I will go down here. Right now we have no lights we've put in the scene, and everything is rendering with the default light setup, which gives us basic lighting. But I did want to introduce lighting in this, so I'm going to leave that checked just to again show you a render, and then I'm going to uncheck that and render, and you notice the scene is black. So let's start there with a black scene. I'm going to pull this away, and I'm going to create a light. I'm going to create a directional light. There's several different types of light here. I would avoid ambient lights for the most part, but mainly deal with these two here. A directional light is like the sun, meaning it has parallel rays, meaning that if I have this shadow here, the snowman's not going to get big. The shadow would not get bigger as it goes farther, which it would if it were a point light, broadcasting light from a single point. So this is just kind of a lot of rays in the same direction. Another thing I want to introduce is something called the IPR, which is an interactive preview render. This is quite buggy, and sometimes it works. When it does work, it's great. If you can't get it to work, then you'll just have to click the render button every time to update your scene. The IPR, we'll try it. It may crash us, but I'll just pick up. I'll pause the video and pick back up if it does. But you drag a box where you want it to update, and then you can begin changing attributes. And mine gets these lines. So I was changing the brightness of our light here, and you could kind of tell in real time how it's updating it. So I might go with a 0.8 and change the color here to like a light blue, bluish gray. something like that. What we haven't done yet is add shadows to the scene yet. I don't think the IPR can handle shadows, so it's limited. That's why if you're doing some basic light positioning, it may help. So as I change the angle of the light, so lots of times you may, if you've dealt with photography or shooting video or any kind of lighting, you may have heard the term three-point lighting. That is, you have a main light source. This one would probably be a harsher light, may cast a shadow, and then oftentimes you have that would create very dark edges where no light is coming. So then they would create a second light, and I just duplicated this directional light, and notice now that's bringing light into those places that were darker. So I'm going to line that. See how? Alright, this has a really dark edge. I'm going to swing this one around, and it's basically bringing light to that area that was not lit. Sometimes they might change. I might change this to kind of a pinkish or purplish hue, something complemented to complement that blue color of the first one. Nothing extreme, but notice how this changes as I change that second light color. And usually you have the main one, which is called your key light. That's usually the most intense. We'll have it maybe a 0.9, and this would be your fill light, which is probably half intense, 0.4. And we don't have any shadows turned on, which we'll turn those on in a minute. If you notice the black sky, that is the back of your camera. So if you wanted to change that color to something else, you can select your camera, and you want to come down into your environment, and you could even put an image back there if you wanted to connect an image, or if you want to do a solid color. If I want to do a kind of a something like that. Now you don't see it immediately, but when you render, notice that's not black anymore. So feel free to experiment with putting an image back there. You could put a sunset or some sort of image. So we're getting closer now. So those are your directional lights. You can also, if you wanted to accent a single area, you can create a point light. And point lights broadcast from a single point. So if you wanted to accent an area, suppose we wanted to accent this snowman, we could put it here, render, and you notice it's much lighter here in front of the snowman. You can change in the attribute editor, you can change the color of I'm not an IPR anymore. My IPR should still work, so you can see kind of if I play with different colors of the light, what happens. And you notice the orange here. So also, let's keep looking at some of the light attributes. You have intensity, which that makes sense, but something that works hand in hand with intensity is your fall off or your decay rate. Light, the natural tendency of light is the further distance it travels, the less intense it is. So I think this would be a linear drop off. I think physically accurate light has something called a quadratic fall off. If you do a quadratic fall off, you're going to have to really take your intensity up to make up for that. I'll make this something so you can kind of see what's being influenced. I may have to take it up to 50, and you can kind kind of see where that light's influencing. For the most part, I would do too strong colors. It's possible you can do any color, but to play with your lights for now, let's just play with the directional lights and the point lights, and play with the decay rates. You can play with the colors.